How are you, Lord Holmes? You well?
Fantastic. You, Tim?
I'm very good. I cannot complain. I've got a lovely grey suit on, which is very light and untarnished at the moment. So let's see how it goes. But if Lottie doesn't like me, my leg might get a little bit wet, but we'll see. We'll see, right? We'll see. So the conversations about technology. You sit on, I think, is it now 4 or 5 all-parliamentary groups?
Some.
A few. Are you scared or excited about the future with regards to technology?
Neither scared nor excited, but definitely rationally optimistic. There's such massive possibilities, not inevitabilities, but such massive possibilities. And ultimately, the reason to be absolutely positive is it's down to us.
So we're in control?
We are.
Okay, so you now have a panel that you are going to control and ask questions around humanity and technology. Are you ready to bring them up onto the stage?
I'm so ready. Just a couple of things before we do. You said you want a doctor's appointment, so if I could just ask you to cough twice before we begin.
I'm coughing already,
yeah,
but no.
Exactly. It all seems to be fine. It's good.
Okay, good.
I never had any doubts.
I felt a little tingle. That's okay. It's good.
You weren't the only one.
Pray continue. Professionalism.
Exactly. Emphasis on little, I think, but we won't.
Another cough.
We won't dwell on that. But I think who would have imagined it's barely past 10 o'clock in the morning, already we have our second dog collar on stage. And before we get our panel up here, I think I would, in that we have a reverend in the house, I think I should take this opportunity for a confession. I honestly, all of you know this who are in this room, when I went into that elite dating agency in Piccadilly, I swear I was looking for the front door to Lucy's church. I promise you.
Confession.
Exactly. Anyhow, let's get started. We've got a great panel. We're going to talk about AI, FinTech, talent, and all therein, and the possibilities that exist. And ultimately, the one thing I'd like to leave at this point before we get up here is this thought. Technology is too important to leave to the technologists. It's for all of us. It's for all of the business, and it's all of our business. So, should we get the panel up?
Let's go.
Let's do it.
Brilliant. I'm going to place you right onto the far side. Here you go. Everybody say hello to Lottie. Okay. Not R, her name's not R, it's Lottie. As the panel progresses. While the panel are making way to the stage, it's become aware to me that there are a number of people who are very fit and they want to use their exercise. In that, I mean, they're standing up around the room, but I'm also seeing lots of empty chairs that are around. So if you have an empty chair next to where you are, can you do me one of two favors? Can you either put a bag on that chair, a white bag, not your own personal bag, so that we can identify there's an empty chair there, or move along so the empty chair is at the end of the row. I know people don't like moving. You know, Simon, they like to stay in the same position, don't they? They get comfortable where they are. If you don't like moving, put the white chair and then wait for somebody to step over your lap. So if you don't like people stepping over your lap, move along the chair. Up to you completely. Fantastic. Lord Holmes, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. We can all be the judge on whether he's in danger of getting a wet trouser leg or not. Either at the top or the bottom of the leg. So we have a fabulous panel. We're talking the fourth industrial revolution. So we have 4 speakers, 4 presentations. We can have everybody up on the stage. And first at the lectern, please give a massive, large, big Royal Geographic Society welcome to Harvey Lewis.
Thank you very much, Lord Holmes. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many friendly faces this morning, but I bet you're thinking, why on earth is there a guy from tax on stage? The truth is, I'm not a tax professional, I'm a technologist. And the good news is that artificial intelligence will soon automate all tax people. The bad news, I guess, is that means your taxes will now be collected by the Terminator. Did you know there's a website you can visit which will tell you the probability of automation of any occupation? So this is what it says about tax preparers. And just in case I'm holding out a faint glimmer of hope in the numbers, the website also has this helpful, clarifying message. You're laughing now, but guess what it says about HR professionals? Well, the answer is, actually, you're totally safe, which is a bit of a relief for me, otherwise the rest of my talk would be a bit awkward. So why is it that tax preparers can be automated, but HR professionals can't? So to answer that question, let's get to grips with AI. Now, artificial intelligence is commonly defined as any technology capable of performing a task that would ordinarily be considered to require human intelligence. Now, I prefer to think about AI as a kind of specialized intelligence. And by specialized intelligence, I mean it's capable of meeting very specific goals and objectives, like recognizing handwritten digits, or figuring out the next move in a game of chess. Today's AI is really very specialized. It's not at all capable of meeting broader goals. So when researchers look at the impact of technology on jobs, they do so by decomposing individual occupations into the set of activities that are either specialized or require more general skills. And the probability of automation is largely dependent upon the ratio of the two. So for tax preparers, repeatedly collecting and analyzing transactional data, that's highly specialized. For HR professionals, working with, supporting, and developing your people, that's really very ambiguous and ad hoc and requires much more general skills. So how does AI work? Well, the term artificial intelligence is nowadays largely synonymous with machine learning, which, as the term suggests, is the process by which computers learn to recognize patterns in a set of inputs by being shown lots of examples along with their corresponding outputs. So if we show a machine learning algorithm lots of CVs from historical job applicants, the algorithm will learn to recognize the patterns of words and phrases that correspond with the eventual hiring outcome. So phrases like winner of The Apprentice, you might put on the you're hired pile, and responsible for negotiating Brexit on the other pile. In principle, the more data we show the algorithm, the better its accuracy and its confidence, and it might even become better at CV screening than people. But the promise of artificial intelligence extends far beyond CV screening. It reaches into virtually every domain, every sector, every occupation, and every job. With seemingly superhuman capabilities, artificial intelligence can now drive cars, play games of strategy, make financial investments, talk to you, and even create works of art. So is it any wonder then that so many jobs are at risk of automation? Indeed, many pundits recommend that we should retreat from the specialized tasks and let the computers do the work. But that narrative is dominated by a thread which puts technology before talent. How did human intelligence get so underrated? We're all familiar with Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, which he presented at the Royal Geographical Society more than 150 years ago. But if that was the only template for intelligence, then all that nature would have to do to create smart beings would be to cram as many neurons as possible into each cubic centimeter of brain, and we would still be living in the trees with the other great apes while elephants, whale sharks, and crows ruled the earth. So human intelligence is much more than the product of natural selection. Humans are the only species to be able to pass on our DNA through our genes and our knowledge through language. Our intelligence is a wonderfully sophisticated amalgam of naturally inherited competence, our ability to capture and process data and information, and culturally evolved comprehension, our ability to understand context and turn that data and information into knowledge and wisdom. AI has no such comprehension. In fact, its competence is imperfect. It makes mistakes, and sometimes in very unexpected ways. It's true that artificial intelligence can sometimes perform tasks that are superhuman, but really only at the risk of occasionally being super stupid. And the argument that technology is better, faster, cheaper, or safer than people overall really only holds if you're prepared to accept potentially catastrophic mistakes. And there are too few people worrying about this right now. I'm building applications which automatically classify corporate transactions for tax purposes. It's remarkably accurate, but occasionally makes mistakes that are profoundly obvious to tax professionals. Others are dealing with self-driving cars that struggle to recognize everyday road users, or flight control systems that very infrequently mistake a climb for a stall. So in these situations, when things go wrong, it's not sufficient to say that humans should retreat from the specialized tasks while we let computers do the work. Because we need the knowledge and skills to step in when things go wrong. It's also true that unless we practice those skills, our competence will degrade. The other problem with our definition of artificial intelligence is that it implies a competition between people and machines, particularly when we want to implement a technology to automate a human task. We can suffer from what Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist and psychologist, calls "what you see is all there is." When we look at a process, we see only those aspects that are immediately obvious. We miss the implied, the implicit, and the intangible. And as a consequence, the technology that we implement can be dangerously fragile. So the whole narrative of perfect, superhuman technology leads us to the inevitable conclusion that technology will decimate jobs, and that we will cluster around a narrowing strip of human-only skills that the computers can't yet mimic. That's utter fallacy. So what's the alternative? Well, think about it for a second. Technology hasn't changed the need for farmers to be great at farming, compared with ages past when the technology was a metal plow and a couple of horses. Today's farmers are doing fundamentally the same kind of tasks, but to be more productive, they now have to have a good grasp of biochemistry, of engineering, geology, geography, meteorology, and many other skills. Technology hasn't removed the need for the skills, it's deepened the requirement for them. And just look at the cockpit of a new tractor. It's more like the cockpit of a modern fighter jet. To be able to apply those deep skills, farmers need to understand and work with the technology. So my conclusion is this. Humans need more than human skills. We need to be specialists and multi-skilled. We need to have an appreciation of the technology that we use so that we can understand when it is strong and accurate and when it is biased and prone to error. These people are T-shaped, but it's a T that gets wider and deeper with every new advance in technology. And it's really only with these people that organizations can meet their objectives and that we can strike the right balance between humanity and technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harvey. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Julia Streets.
So, yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Julia Streets. I have quite a strange sort of mashed up life. So by day, I'm an entrepreneur in the city. I've had 30 years working in the city in the world of financial services and technology. In my spare time, I'm also a stand-up comedian. So I'm hoping that in the next about 9-10 minutes, I'm going to bring, thank you for the round of applause, appreciate it. That's the only one I've had all week. So, but it is my job today. They said, would you come and talk about FinTech? The world of FinTech, and would you do it in under 10 minutes? So there's quite a lot to get through. I'm going to give this my best shot. But these are two things that I really care about. One of them is about financial services and technology. It is what I do all day. I am an entrepreneur. I set up a business advising many of the innovators in the industry who are bringing new products and services to market in many different ways. I'm going to broadly kind of drive you through kind of how that works. But also, I'm deeply passionate about the question of talent, because I'm personally very concerned that we don't have the talent that we need today, and I'm not sure that we have the talent that we need tomorrow. And there are many dynamics around that. And I set up a podcast a couple of years ago called Diversity Podcast. See what I did there? Diversity Podcast. All about, thank you, all about diversity and inclusion in financial services, because I believe that is where we will find the talent, this T-shaped talent, actually, that Harvey was talking about. So my goal in the next number of minutes is to do really three things. One is I want to just kind of paint a picture of what we mean when we talk about the industry that is FinTech. The second, as I want you to is to share some thoughts about what that means for organizations of different shapes and sizes and the people who work in your organizations. And then the third thing is perhaps leave you some thoughts about what that means for you as individuals. So first of all, let me just talk about this industry that is FinTech. The UK industry is 34 billion worth of deals, and that's always quite a good measure. So we've got KPMG, sorry, Harvey, your competitor, but KPMG brought out a FinTech Pulse report last year. 34 billion number of VC deals, private equity deals, and also M&A. Now, that actually rose from the previous year from 12 billion. So if you think about the 12 to 34, that is a tripling of the size of deals that are happening in the world of FinTech. And compare that with the global stage, you're looking at 112 billion, this is dollars, $112 billion worth of deals in FinTech around the globe, and that is up 120%. This is growing massively, but it is on a global scale. This is a highly interconnected global business, as we know. So let me just think about where does FinTech kind of define itself, and always start and end with the regulator. If you ask anybody today about where the innovation is and where the people are looking for ways in which to improve customer service, whether that's B2C, B2B, institutional, wholesale, international, it is all driven by the regulation. And the regulator, of course, here in the UK, is very well lauded, and rightly so, for its commitment to innovation. And it has basically three principles around which we frame the whole, in my mind, the whole of FinTech. So one of them is about fair and open competition. So basically creating an industry and supporting an industry that is trying to compete for the benefit of consumers and investors and shareholders, and to be able to do that on a global scale. The second is about the stability of the markets. It's really important that, particularly when we think of the world of the capital markets, that the markets are stable and robust. I won't say strong and stable, I can't quite bring myself to say that, but it is strong and robust. And then the third thing is all about consumer protection. So as we're bringing new products and services to market, are they actually working in your best interests as individuals? Are they secure? And actually what the FCA has done is created a sandbox. I always love the idea of a sandbox. People in there were little, kind of throwing their toys out of prams and building sandcastles. But the idea being that if you're using data, your data, in order to create new technology that is designed to enable you as an investor, a consumer, a shareholder, or indeed as a corporate, is that how do we make sure that that is safe? So that that company goes out of business, or indeed there is a problem with its data or its technology, that anybody and everybody who's involved in that process understands that they are playing in a safe place, but also that it encourages innovation, because entrepreneurs have to be certain that if they're putting their own money at risk to create new products and services, that actually there are certain protections around them as well. So this is a really, really exciting time. Let me just draw out what I mean when I talk about the broad world that is FinTech. So start at one end with the institutional world. So think about pensions and investments. That's why it matters to all of us. We should all, I hope you are, putting your money in your pension. It's interesting, the genomic conversation earlier about lifespans and also what you need to be thinking about in terms of helping your employees prepare for their pensions. This is where it begins and ends in many regards. Where you put your money every month goes into pension funds, which are invested with asset managers, the institutional world of investment, who are making decisions about which stocks to buy and sell, and who are looking for information to come to them to help them make better decisions in order to return that investment performance. They, in turn, are working with intermediaries who are trading on stock exchanges, particularly in the world of equities, and are basically trying to get the best possible execution, the best possible trades, the best possible transaction for the benefit of that fund. Now, then you go into clearing and settlement. That is the institutional world. So we talk about equities, shares, bonds, fixed income, derivatives, futures and options, commodities, energy, foreign exchange, you name it. That is that world that we think about. There's an enormous amount of innovation there, basically about making that much, much more efficient. The days of going onto your open outcry floor and shouting to get heard, to get your trades done, they have gone. They are all highly automated. End-to-end processing, as we all know in every industry, end-to-end processing not only drives down cost, reduces risk, eliminates manual workflows, and also creates competition. And of course, you'll have heard, I'm sure, about high-frequency trading. Don't think that this is necessarily an evil entity. This is all about getting in to get the trades done at the best possible execution. And thinking about the pre-trade, the at-trade, and the post-trade. And there's an enormous wealth of innovation there, which is rather attractively called risk tech and reg tech, all driven by regulation. So that's the institutional world, the capital markets world, and there's an enormous amount of work going on there across all the different asset classes. And actually what we're beginning to see is that these things are becoming highly interoperable in terms of multi-asset class trading. So if you are trading in a particular region, there will be a foreign exchange element to that. And the way that the dynamics of each of those asset classes is very specific, but now becoming highly integrated. So that's one area. The second area to think about, as I see them in my head, my weird head, is really all about wholesale, large-scale corporate institutions, financial institutions who are providing a number of services out to their customers. So I'm thinking there really around, first of all, what do you do as an institution for treasury and custody of assets? How are you looking after your members, your customers' assets? Now, that used to be a very, very old-fashioned way of doing that, and there is an enormous amount of innovation in that. The second is thinking then about your international trade, so thinking about trade finance deals. And how does capital get raised and how does capital get invested, not only domestically and internationally, in order to enable trade on an international scale as well as domestically. The third then, within this kind of the large corporate, is wealth management. So we think about the private banks and the family offices. Don't just think about ultra-high net worth individuals, but actually think about how people are looking at their collective assets. So part of that's property, part of that's property and real estate, part of it's around alternatives like art, as well as, of course, traditional investments, as you would expect. And there's innovation around that because, the way that people used to look after their customers might have been a statement once every 3 months. But actually now, of course, there is an appetite, not only from a B2B, but a B2C to get this all real time, because real-time insights help you to give better advice. That is the general consensus around that. And then the other is thinking really about banking. Banking in and of itself is a whole session in and of itself. Actually, all of these, you could break them down. Open banking. You'll hear people talk about open banking. This is the whole concept of, if I have a bank account with one institution, my mortgage with another, and I might have a loan from another and probably some other deal with somebody, the reality is I have got different bilateral relationships with each financial institution. The world is working, which is actually putting the onus upon those institutions to say, I as a customer need to have the data. I need to be able to holistically look at my investment liabilities and also my assets and to make considered decisions. And the banks have to open their doors, which is creating an interesting dynamic in itself. Also then think about SMEs, think about the smaller institutions that are basically trying to do really what the large institutions are trying to achieve as well, which is what do you do with your money? How do you do your lending? How do you do your investments? How do you also consider about your savings? And then, of course, it goes right the way through to you and me. How do we, as individuals, who, by the way, we all want it on our smartphones, and we want it now. We want to have social tools that will guide us to what other people are doing. We need to be able to give instant feedback, and we want information through bots and biotics all the way through. We talked a little bit earlier about blockchain, some of the enabling technologies around that. We could talk about insurance. We could talk about cryptocurrencies. There is an enormous wave of innovation going all the way through. But the big things that organizations really have to think about, one is data. Data. Everything that Harvey was talking about that's driving AI in FinTech is a huge growth. Is it a proper, sophisticated piece of AI, or is it just a clever algorithm? Big questions around that, but you have to get your data. Number two, legacy. Organizations, how hard can it be a bank to tell me what my statement is or my position at any given moment? It's incredibly hard. There are siloed databases across financial institutions that need to be aligned, need to be coordinated. But if you get that wrong and your fundamental data is not as clean as it should be, you will be creating issues in terms of your innovation pathway through the use of AI. We talk about biases. If it's not rock steady and crystal clear right from the very beginning. And this is asking some questions of you in terms of your organizations and your people. And one of the questions I'm just going to leave you with, and then I'm sure we're going to go into Q&A afterwards, is, first of all, the competition for talent is incredibly fierce. So when you think about the technologists in your organization, the world of FinTech will be looking to poach them. Also, what we're finding is that actually a lot of young talent coming into the industry is looking to large institutions to simply get it on their CV. They are looking for entrepreneurial environments that also have a very clear sense of purpose. And 40% of millennials, by the way, have a hustle on the side. So there is a very interesting dynamics about, are you actually fostering the innovation in your organization, or is your talent at risk? And then the other thing, which I really want to think about, I've talked about pensions, I won't return to that, but I will talk about mental health and financial contribution to mental health. When we think about the welfare of your staff and we think about how you as professionals are guiding them, there is a lot of innovation around payroll tech, but also I think there is a huge opportunity and there's a huge responsibility for all of us as employers and of nurturers of talent, right the way through that life learning journey, is also to think about financial education. Because there was a survey that came out of 10,000 employees across 15 different sectors that said 40% of your workforce are concerned about their current financial situation and their future financial situation. And therefore, in this appetite of bringing everybody to work to contribute as much as they can, what is our role, actually, as the HR profession in nurturing and educating that workforce as well? That is the fastest canter through FinTech I have ever done. I hope it was useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia. Our next speaker is a doctor. Don't worry, Tim. He's not a medical doctor. Please welcome Dr. Nigel Spencer.
Thank you very much, Lord Holmes, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. So my name's Nigel Spencer from Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford. I'm here just to give a very brief insight into talent development and how that's evolving in professional service firms. I'm going to have a look at what's changing, what's the impact of technology, and also think about some of the talent development challenges and perhaps some ways forward as well. So in terms of my background, I've been 20 years working in professional firms, often I was at PwC, and then at 2 law firms where I looked after talent development globally. And I'm just going to quickly cover about 4 areas here. First of all, to give a little bit of context in the sense of how professional services is being disrupted, how that's happening already. Secondly, to think about the skill sets that clients are now demanding. Thirdly, to think about, well, what does this mean for our talent agenda? Thinking about what we need to be helping with if we're creating the professional advisors of tomorrow. And lastly, what talent strategies have I seen that perhaps might help, and some tips and ideas that might be applicable perhaps in organizations such as those you're from. Okay, so if we think a little bit about the context, how is it being disrupted now? Well, I think as Harvey's already mentioned, PSFs were the classic knowledge businesses, ones which have moved very quickly from an environment where they were more traditional, even paper-based, to ones where, where the service was seen to be a knowledge transmission type service, to one where, frankly, the clients can find a lot of the information at the press of a button, for free quite often too. So disruption has been here now for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And if you say what's changing, I guess what's really changing is that concept and the basis of what value is to clients, both in terms of what the service is and how that service is being delivered as well. So what's changing in the market? What has that disruption look like? Well, certainly big data, AI, and technology has been one of those factors which has led to clients demanding, the classic more for less, looking for greater efficiency, and also in terms of how the service is being delivered, as I've mentioned. Secondly, there have also been some regulatory changes which have meant there are lower barriers to entry. So there are actually more competitors in the market as well, providing that service. So that's shaken up the market in many ways too. In terms of how firms have been using tech, well, that's really about, they've used it in a myriad of ways, and Harvey's already given some examples of that with some nice pictures he showed. It might be automated contracts, your tax computations, it might be in FinTech, online dispute resolution, e-discovery, all these searching tools. So basically, if as someone said to me in a firm a few months ago, they said, look, it's very simple, Nigel. People that used to spend, say, 20 hours, perhaps one of our juniors spends 20 hours doing a task, now they can do that in 3. So a massive shift in the sense of how people are spending their time. And that's been something that's really shifted in firms. In terms of how firms are embracing tech and how that's changing and how they're evolving, some have created innovation hubs. And we did that at the last firm I was at as well. What we were trying to do was create what we called a decluttered thinking space to invite our clients into the space and say, how is your world changing in your business, and how do we need to change our world to fit more with that business that you now have? Others are acting as incubators and getting lots of tech startups in as well and creating some new services and tools out of that. And finally, another disruption factor, you could say, is really consolidation in the industry. So that's been happening now for the last 10, 15, 20 years. I remember when I joined PW, as it then was, I think it was part of the Big Six, and now that's changed to the Big Four, obviously. So, there have been lots of changes. But it's not just about scale and market share and going global. Other firms have thought, well, do we need to build on adjacent services in this new technological world? And actually, EY is a really good example of that. About a year and a half ago, they bought a company called Riverview Law, which was one of the new providers. So not only are there new providers in the market, sometimes these are now amalgamating and coming together. And just lastly, in terms of disruption, PSFs certainly haven't been immune for something that I think we've all been facing, and which, Julia, you hinted at there as well. The whole, what you might call the talent disruption. Because the old model in professional firms of saying to people, it's a great career, come in here, work hard for 12 or 15 years, and there might be partnership at the end of that route. That doesn't cut it anymore. Certainly in terms of retention, but even in terms of attraction. And I think, as you said, Julia, the attraction point is a really interesting point as well. So it's really quite a different landscape. So what are the skill sets that clients are looking for? Well, if we just think for a minute, historically, the world of the professional was very much the technical expert. someone who developed that expertise and can almost never really escape that. It became part of their identity, even when they were very senior, because they could never give up the doing as part of their work, especially because in many organizations, as a professional, you could add value, and your credibility in your organization came from your expertise. It came from the doing. So you could never escape the doing and become more like a general manager, not purely anyway. But if you listen to client feedback now and all the surveys that have been done, what are they telling us about what they value? Well, they say we like professional advisors who can foresee trends in industries, help us look over the horizon. We want people who can partner and collaborate, perhaps drawing, we've got really complex business problems. So how actually are you going to build a team around that of very different skill sets? Harvey hinted at this already. They want people who are data aware. And I don't think that's professionals who necessarily write the code, but certainly it means professionals who can look at the trends and pull out the meaning from that, which therefore creates value for the clients. And I think what they especially want is people who are curious and are looking to problem solve, because their businesses are moving so fast. I say Julia's given so many examples of that already. So it's no longer about giving the answer as a professional. It's more about being with them and looking at their problem. And I think Anne will talk about this in a few minutes. It's about being able to ask the great questions rather than just about telling the answers. And that's a coaching skill set that we'll come on to. And lastly, going back to one of the points of diversity as well, they're certainly looking for diversity of thought and perspective. And that's meant that many firms in their talent strategies are now looking and saying, well, actually, do we need to recruit more people with STEM backgrounds as well as more humanities backgrounds? So if we were to stand back from the detail and think, what does that mean and what does that look like? What it says to me is actually, it's the human skills that actually become the differentiators looking forwards. So I'm an optimist in the audience, by the way. And as that moves forward, if that becomes the case, what does the advisor of tomorrow look like if that's what the clients are looking for? So with some research that we've done over the last year, what I just wanted to put up was a picture of perhaps what some of the career paths are starting to look like, how things are starting to change. It's no longer just the linear career path. So just to talk you through this picture from the bottom to the top, you might come in now perhaps with a degree apprenticeship. You might still then go into a practice group, develop some expertise there, but then perhaps you might go off into one of Harvey's teams, into perhaps one of the data analytics teams. You might then evolve and move into an area where some of those knowledge tools are being used in an innovation hub, and perhaps facilitating those client conversations. So again, think of the skill set that that's implying. And then perhaps lastly, you might go perhaps into one of the strategy groups looking at one of your industries, one of your verticals that you work with your clients on. And I was very interested, by the way, we did this research over the last year, and then about 3 weeks ago, one of the big law firms, Linklaters, actually said something very similar. They said, we're having our people come through, the traditional path, going into the practice groups, but now we're saying to them they can go off and go into one of the technical part of the firm, into one of the technology areas where we're working with one of our technology partners. So again, these things are starting to play through in professional firms, and that's how skill sets are changing. So what this says to me is that what we need above all to build in the future professionals is really the agility and breadth of skill set, and also the resilience to think, I'm not going to be defined and my identity can't be bound up just in my expertise. I'm going to need to evolve my career. I need to be an ongoing learner because I'm going to need to reinvent myself many times in my career of perhaps 30 or 40 years. And this led me to the thought of what I called the polytechnic professional. I'm a classicist, by the way, so I start off from the Greek part of the world. But it struck me that the word polytechnic, which in Greek literally means poly, many, techni, skill. And it struck me that this might be a nice summing up of perhaps what the professional advisor of the future needs to look like. And I use that word skill advisory, sort of deliberately there, when, again, we're thinking of that skill versus knowledge debate as well. So lastly, just to pick out perhaps one or two things that we can help our people with, I think if career paths begin to look much more like this, that more lattice-style career and that breadth that we need to create for people, I think we certainly need to help people through transitions. And what we know about that is it's about helping them prepare with the skill set to get through transitions. That is really what helps them. Also, our L&D agenda needs to be about breadth. And I think it goes to that CIPD research of saying, in the talent function, we need to think about curating a set of really broad resources that people can dip into. It's not just about creating a narrow set of courses. And lastly, I would say, for me, it's really about experiential learning and actually creating the learning experiments. I'm a massive believer in Herminia Ibarra's work around working identity, where she also talked about let people create little learning experiments as they go through their careers. And so my thought there is, in the 70-20-10 method of developing people, our question, I think, as the talent team is, how often are we spending time on the 10% of creating programs versus investing time in creating those 70% of the on-the-job opportunities that we need to create for people to build this agility and resilience so that they can go off into the tech team. They can perhaps go on an early client placement and find out and learn by doing as they build their careers. Because what I've learned with professionals over the last 15 or 20 years is that they won't think themselves into a new way of acting, but they can act themselves into a new way of thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our final speaker for this session, Anne Scoular.
Last Friday, just a week ago, a gunman in Christchurch, New Zealand, shot dead 50 people who were kneeling in prayer. How many here have some connection with Christchurch? Some friend, relative, colleague? Yeah. It's one of my hometowns. But that's not why. It was Utrecht 3 days later. And it's not just these events. The climate is trembling on the brink of the point of no return. My friend and colleague, Andrew White at Oxford Saïd, points out that almost every sector is facing an existential crisis. In other words, a crisis because of what we've been hearing, that it will go out of existence in the way it's currently structured. Oil and gas, asset management, banking, even charities. There was a survey last week. Only 35% of us trust charities anymore. There's been a great plummet. Some charities we love. There's been a great plummet in trust of institutions. Technology has played a part in this. The gunman in New Zealand streamed his horror live on Facebook. Before Christchurch, I was going to talk about much more positive aspects of technology and humanity coming together. But right now, it seems to me that the risks are what I'd like to talk about. In order to mitigate those risks, absolutely, as the theme today says, in order to mitigate the risks, I think as technology rises, our humanity has to rise to match. And right now, it is feeling out of balance. Let me say what I think is happening. I think, even perhaps in this room, certainly out there, there's some anxiety and fear about technology, but about so many other things that are happening. And what happens with anxiety and fear? It's too simple to say that the chemicals, the hormones, shut down the neocortex. That's way too simple. But broadly, if we are fearful and anxious, our prefrontal cortex, the newest part of the brain, the part of the brain that is the most magnificent manifestation of humanity, that brought us Mozart and Mandela, that is severely impaired by fear and anxiety. So people have mentioned the B word already. I wasn't going to mention it. But if leaders are in this survival state, their thinking is boxed in. And we need to help leaders get out and escape and get back up to their highest thinking functions where they can really engage with their humanity and with us again. So what do I think we can do about this? One of the things that I was going to talk about is strengths, and I'm not going to talk about it more today, but we've put it on the Changeboard app, and it's also on my LinkedIn profile. There's a page that's plug and play, a little present for you. So strengths research is world-class research. The next economist, if psychologists get to nick another Nobel Prize from the economists, Martin Seligman might get it. So it's world-class research. It's very practical, very useful for you and your organizations, and it's either free or very low cost. But the thing I really want to talk about is I think we need to train leaders to coach. Now, I know this is a very sophisticated audience, a very lovely audience, but you know a lot about coaching, I know. But if we're going to strip it down to the real essentials for our leaders, they're very busy, they've got a ton else to do. We've got to make it very focused of what we want them to do. So, 1, definition. Traditional mentoring, consulting, advising puts in content, skill, knowledge, information. Coaching pulls out the capacity that people have within. I know you have to mix it up. A decent mentor needs to be able to coach. A decent coach needs to be able to throw in some other things so that they don't get bored, of course. But to learn it, to train leaders in this skill, it's useful to split them apart. There are 3 essential skills that I'd like our leaders to have. I know we know a lot more, but these 3 things I think will be transformational. They are simple, but they are not easy. 1, listening. When I'm in a bolshy mood, which I am post-Christchurch, and I tell it really straight, people ask me what we do, and I say we teach senior leaders to shut up and listen. And think how transformational that would be. The second thing is questioning. They need whole new sets of questions. They need to ask questions that set off little fireworks in other people's minds, not questions to justify what I already think. They might be really simple questions like, what else? Or what really matters to you? Or they might be quite funky questions like, what do you know now that you're going to find out in a year? Third, structuring. And this is almost, which is the most important? They're all important. Very senior leaders are often very insecure overachievers, very driven, often quite introverted. And typically one of their survival strategies is that they will not get into conversations where they don't know the answer and which they can't control. But the conversations that need to be had now, that need to be had more than ever, are big and they're messy. And some of the structures, the simple structures that we can teach, help give them the confidence, because of course, as we all know, they often don't have the confidence underneath. That's what's driving it all. Why else would they live the lives they lead? We give them the confidence that they know they can't control, but they can shape and structure these difficult, huge conversations with multiple people in very difficult areas, often when there's even, heaven forbid, emotion involved. So listening, questioning, structuring. We're publishing some research. Oxford Saïd Business School and Meyler Campbell are publishing some research later this year on a case study on the return on investment on training leaders to coach. Not the return on investment on coaching, we know that, but on what happens if we teach our leaders to shut up and listen. It's the first time it's going to be published anywhere. The early results are in. I shouldn't probably say this, but I said I'm in a mood. And I can tell you that the ROI is looking at about 6 times investment. And so I've said we're going to publish it later this year, so that's going to give us a deadline. I've talked about what these skills are. I'd now like, if I can figure out which button I press, I'd now like to talk about how we pull off this miracle. Yes, it was that button. So this is the process. The vertical axis is information. People high up there, let's call them mentors, are really rich in content, knowledge, information. The horizontal axis is energy, that's pure coaching, very energizing, raises motivation. There's no such thing as pure coaching, but if I look into your eyes, if I pull out your hopes, your dreams, your fears, you walk out of this room 3 feet above the ground. The drawback is there's no content. So what do? We take people in at the top of the left-hand axis. People who've got rich hinterland, who know a whole lot of stuff. We drag them kicking and screaming, or if they're British, whimpering quietly, to the bottom right-hand corner. Now, you laugh, but actually, it can be a very difficult transition, because if you have been living in that top left-hand quadrant all your life, and you've been reinforced and rewarded for it, and if you haven't had a quality of life, if your work is everything, then it can sometimes come back and be your whole ego identity. And if I'm asking you to take that away, I'm making you very vulnerable. So we have to structure that quite carefully. But we get there. And so once they've got it in their bones, then we turn around and we say, okay, go back up the right-hand side and bring back in your content knowledge. So you arrive in the top right quadrant, where you are ideally at the top right-hand corner of it, where you are world-class on the ability to tell, but also world-class on the ability to ask. And that is the top right quadrant that I'm aiming for our leaders. We call it the Ignite quadrant. That's the name of our program, but it's also a verb, because coaching can't do everything. There's so much happening. But it can be the match, it can be the spark, it can get the conversations going, it can open people's leaders' brains up so that they can enable all the skills and the humanity of the rest of us. There are several of us in the room today from Oxford and from Meyler Campbell. Please grab us at the break, we'd love to talk to you. No, actually, we'd love to listen. We should be listening, shouldn't we? And in Christchurch tonight, the country has been working round the clock. The police completed their investigations by Tuesday. Since then, 24/7, volunteers from all around the country have been ripping out the 2 mosques, completely renovating, completely rebuilding, even volunteers working through the night, building new gardens. So that tomorrow, Friday prayers, some very brave people are going back into the mosques. It's tonight our time. They're going to be supported by the looks by a very large proportion of the New Zealand public, and I hope we might also spare them a thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. I think there could be no greater underlining of what we saw in the last week of the absolute worst of humanity than the absolute best of humanity. What we're going to do, I'm going to ask the panel a quick question. I'm going to go down the line, then we'll get Tim back up here, we'll get a question from the floor, and then, yes, I know you're all starting to shake a bit, you will get your coffee. And for the Americans amongst us, you will get your coffee. So my question for fabulous presentations, I'm going to go down the line. Really what I want to get at is, in the midst of all this, what do you advise HRDs, talent managers, everybody involved in this space, the people piece, what should people in this room consider doing to get on the front foot with all this? Harvey.
Thank you. So, I mean, it's a great question. I think you've heard from a range of presenters this morning that we do need human skills, but we also need more technical and specialist skills. So actually the challenge isn't that we should focus on one or the other. It's how on earth do we find the time, the content, and the energy to deliver all of those things to our people. So that, for me, I think is the substantial challenge that faces us.
Thank you. Juliet?
Well, so the big thing I've been thinking about is sort of the blend of what we're learning on the podcast and then also from my day-to-day job is completely to build on what Anne was saying about one of the biggest barriers to change in embracing diversity, which is where I believe that the skills for today and tomorrow lie, is around that middle management layer. Some people call it the sticky middle, the permafrost layer, the hiring managers, who are the most fearful, actually. It's wonderful to hear you talk, actually, about how you can move their mindset. So I would absolutely focus there. The other thing I would say is really get out and meet your talent. So when we talk about get out and talent, I don't mean just young talent. I mean talk about lifelong learning. But for the interest of speed, it's actually get out and find it. So don't be fearful of the fact that they might be deep technologists. They could be algorithmic engineers. They could be cybersecurity specialists, whatever they are. But actually find areas, network internally and network externally.
Nigel?
Thank you. And I guess I'd say where I ended was the thought of experiential learning. And I'd say, what experiences, again, given that we can't create all these different things, again, what about the curation? But the curation also of actually the learning by doing opportunities, whether it's a placement out at a client, whether it's going into the innovation hubs in firms or whatever it is. So how are we actually almost baking that into our talent pipelines? Does that become one of the rotations that the junior people do? So I would say, think about how the business is changing, be guided by the clients, get the clients in, but then also, then embed actually the lived experience, anthropological type thought, the routinization of all of that into their daily work life, so that becomes actually, then they learn by doing, they build their career paths.
Anne?
Thank you. Two things. One, picking up on what Julia said, networking and so on. I think the real advice or question I give you is there's so much that needs to be done. Be the change that you want to see in the world. And that's not easy because so many of you are on your own. And the second thing, therefore, I'd say is tap into our networks. The Change Board network, the Saïd Business School and Meyler Campbell combined have very, very active communities. And they're particularly open. A lot of things we do are free. They're particularly open to people who are isolated on their own, out there leading change and ahead of everybody else. Come and just come and have a coffee with some people who think the same way.
Thank you. Right, let's get one question from you guys, and it's going to be selected by the man who's so much more than the man in the grey suit, Tim Campbell's. Point away.
So we have time for one question, Lord Holmes. And it's going to be an amazing question. No pressure for any hands that go up, just because people are starting to literally shake in their seats. And we haven't got the insurance to cover anybody going into a different direction or dimension. So anybody with that pressure on you, anyone want to ask the question? I saw a hand. Who shouted? Fantastic. Can you say your name, your organisation, and your question? Your killer question.
Try not to be a bit too nervous. So my name's Sarah Duggan, and I'm currently an interim at ExxonMobil. I absolutely love all this change and technology, but being in such a large global organisation of 70,000 people and an interim, what's your biggest tip to influence upwards in terms of this data and technology? Because I'm currently recruiting traders, risk analytics, risk market advisors, and in such a competing world and organisation, how can we, get this best talent into an organisation that needs to change and develop and things?
I hope you're going to put that on a Twitter message now. Thank you very much, Hydrogen Struggle, for sponsoring that. But if you can put that out in the lunchtime, people will find you, and you're going to get some tips quickly from our panel to lead you into that coffee break.
Yep, let's go the other way down the line, so we'll start with Anne.
I don't think I'm expert on this. I went feral 25 years ago. Nigel.
I knew there was something.
Well, in terms of attracting them in, I think I think Julia said as well. I think the wider engagement, actually going and searching different talent pools and actively doing that. I'll hand over to Julia, probably.
Nice to
I'm still
Come on,
thinking.
the streets. You can do it, the streets, come on.
So I think it's a really interesting question because all of those job roles you've just talked about, the dynamics around each of them is complex and nuanced. And I think there was one thing to do. We talk about going out and meeting the talent externally, but also reverse mentoring has enormous value. And what we encourage to take yourself out of your comfort zone is people to mentor people who not only are so not like them, but also do a job that is so not like them. And I think that the point that we made earlier about it will push you to bend your brain around jobs and tasks and domains that you wouldn't naturally be happy in. So I think there was one thing, it would be that.
Harvey?
Thank you. So I'll tell you a little story very, very quickly, because just this week I had some feedback on my team from a senior member of the partnership at EY who said you can do two things to influence better, particularly with people in technical roles. The first one is stop being so deferential to senior people. And the second one was get excited. And that lack of deferential positioning, the excitement, will challenge those leaders to think twice about the investments they make.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. My final ad is really humanity and technology. Let's always have that hat firmly on our heads. I believe when we get this right is when we optimize talent and technology, we put the human at the heart, and we really work that interplay of inclusion and innovation. Let's all thank our panel, and back to Tim.